2019 closed council meeting, council resolved to support the request from Interior Health Authority for the provision of physician housing close to South Okanagan General Hospital for a 1-year period. A fully contained suite has been located and will be funded equally by all participating partners. The cost for the year will be $2,700 to $3,600 per partner. And that concludes my report.
Worship,
Councillor Mattis.
could you as well add that there is an opportunity to recoup some of the expenses on this that may end up costing the town nothing?
Can I add that to you?
You certainly can. It's been added.
It's been added. Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Let's see, adoption of prior minutes. Adoption of March 25th, 2019 regular open council meeting minutes.
I'll move for receipt.
Councillor Schwarzenberger, second. Councillor Bryce, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Moving to water matters. Water quality summary report for the month of March 2019. Do we have any questions regarding the monthly water report?
I'll move receipt.
Receive. Second. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Anything to report, Councillor Sidhu?
So I did talk to, I spoke to you last time about, I was gonna contact, Sidhu and think about the Gallagher Lake siphon. He did get back to me earlier this morning and he, wanted some more information about, he was just wondering so he can, let his colleagues know about what kind of applications we put through so far. And just kind of, some background information about it, and I did email Diane earlier today, but I don't think she's here today. So I think as soon as we can figure out some of that stuff, they said that they would be willing to come down and have a meeting with us, and I think maybe we were busy for this month, there was maybe about 5 weeks they can come this way. And so if we can kind of get them some information, and I can kind of plan for them to come down, and then we can talk more about what we can do with our options with our siphon here. That's all I have to report for.
Thank you. CEO?
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I ask that you forward me your request for information so
Sure.
that I can look at it and get that information for you?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Councillor Machial?
Call from yesterday with you, Worship, and Mr. Mattis, the SOSS enrichment fund, a lot of fun by everybody, and a lot of money is always generated every year for scholarships, and that's about it. Nothing else to report. Yeah, I was just gonna say, with Councillor Sidhu's comments, to make sure we get on that and get all the information that we can. I think it should be fairly easy to put that together.
Yeah, we have a couple meetings set up with Matt General that's on May 1st,
Right.
and Stephen Fear on April 17th. The more doors we can knock on, though, the better get our story out there, Councillor Machial.
Yeah, I got one other question through the CAO. The BCA Association of Irrigation Districts normally has a meeting in April. Are we gonna get the notices of those meetings when we get those? Because that used to come up, and the council would have to approve the rules when we go to.
I have not seen any of that. I will check with the corporate officer. She's the one that gets the daily mail. And,
Okay. I just know it's usually in the middle of April, and I'd like to.
okay,
know
I
that.
will check on that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Machial. Moving to development permit, variance permits. We have amendment of development permit 301 McKinney Road. I'll refer to the contract planner to provide some comment.
So the application in relation to 301 McKinney Road is a request to amend an existing development permit that council approved back in 2015. That particular permit is performing character and multifamily designation is for this particular structure, but a component of that permit, in addition to how the building looked, also dealt with the landscaping to be applied around the building. At that time, it was a fairly detailed plan that was submitted by the proponent. You can see some pictures here from the materials that accompanied the original application in 2015. Council approved it on this basis of these, I guess, diagrams, pictures, photos. And along with that was also a requirement for landscaping security of approximately $156,462. And that's generally taken by the town to ensure that in the event the property owner is unable to finish the landscaping, that there's sufficient funds in order for the town to go and proceed and complete those. And so this is an example of the landscape plan from the 2015 permit. I won't get into all the details, it's fairly extensive, but it does cover trees, shrubs, perennials, and ground cover. The applicant subsequently requested of council in June of 2015 that it reduce the landscaping security, which council agreed to. So we currently have, I believe, being held an amount of $84,320. And more recently, the applicant's come forward and is seeking to change only the landscaping plan, nothing in relation to the design of the building itself. And I put the two proposals up here side by side, the current plan from the existing permit on the left, as well as what is being proposed on the right. As you read in the report, the applicants put forward an argument that they're doing this in order to pursue xeriscaping. They feel that this will blend better with the building and the architectural style. And I guess importantly from the town's perspective, because xeriscaping is encouraged in the official community plan, it will require less watering and therefore is environmentally friendly. As it happens, this proposed amended plan actually carries a slightly higher estimate for landscaping, which under normal practices would trigger the submission or the resubmission of a full landscape security, but the applicant is requesting the council not require that, and that the existing funds that are being held by the town be used for purposes of this revised landscape plan. And that's it for the presentation. I'll answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions, council? Councillor Matthews?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair of the planner, I see on the drawings that we've been given that it shows different types of trees, and there's one little square that refers to decorative rock mulch of one color, and then the green material, or it's hard to tell. What exactly are we proposing for material?
That's a good question. You know, I went to an optometrist a few weeks ago. I was told in the classes. I can't actually read what's in the landscape plan here. I apologize.
It doesn't say anywhere on the plan. That's why I'm asking. I couldn't find it anywhere in any of the typing or in the. It lists all the shrubs, perennials, and ornamental grasses, but it doesn't. It talks about planter walls and concrete ramps.
I can answer that question for you. Originally the aggregate was called Nevada Bob. The landscape company that we've hired to do it has suggested using mocha rock. He thinks that it's more locally available for one thing, and the color of it will blend better with the color of the building. So that's what they're planning to use. So yeah, when you look at it, it looks like almost like grass on the plan. Well, it's not. It's completely covered with this mocha rock.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm familiar with Milk Road.
It's more of a brown yellow color.
I've seen the stuff.
And it's available locally, so.
For those on council that aren't aware, maybe as you drive north of town out by the winery, there's a gravel pit there, and quite often near the highway, you'll see large piles of this kind of brownish rock. That is his brand of mocha rock. There's other companies that supply similar shades, but that's mocha.
Further questions? We have a motion that council approve the amendment of development permit number 2015-01 by replacing Schedule 2 with the attached Schedule 2 to this report, and that council maintain the required landscaping security at $84,320.
I'll move the recommendation.
Mover?
I'll
Second. projections into required setback regulations, refer to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will refer, you just had, I'm sorry, there's just doing some technical stuff back here. This is with respect to zoning amendment bylaw for projections into the required setback regulations. We just had a public hearing with regards to that, so it's now before council for third reading.
I will move third reading of zoning amendment bylaw 1380.02 projections into required setbacks regulations.
Second, Councillor Schwarzenberger.
I do have one question, if I may, Your Worship.
Yes.
Through the chair to the contract planner, were there any submissions in, prior to,
I don't believe so, but I'll just do a quick.
There were no. You'd be right on.
I did see the comment from the building,
Building guy.
Yeah, we have
the
that.
building inspector.
That was first and second.
We have no comments back.
Thank you.
You seconded that, right?
I did.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question, those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Moving to bylaw H2, zoning amendment bylaw 1380.04, cannabis production facilities in the M1 zone. I'll refer to the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will refer this to our contract planner to provide you with an overview.
Sure, thank you. So this is an item that was previously discussed with council, and essentially what we're looking at doing is amending the zoning bylaw in order to allow for cannabis production facilities, which tend to be industrial in nature in terms of the type of structure that they use, to be a permitted use within the general industrial zones. At the moment, based on previous direction from council from a number of years ago, the bylaw is structured so that only the agricultural zone allows for cannabis production. So in order to do this, we're proposing to amend the definition of agriculture, to add new definitions related to cannabis, cannabis production, and cannabis products, and then to further list cannabis production as a permitted use in the M1 zone. And also, as an aside, the amendment bylaw is also proposing to clarify that cannabis production is not a type of permitted home occupation or home industry.
Any questions, Council? Councillor Matz?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship, through to the contract planner. I noticed further down in the report there was some information about if the cannabis production site was in the ALR, the ALR approves that because it's considered an agricultural product. My question is, are any of our M1 zones located in ALR? So we would, if we change this bylaw, then it would be, there would be no fight with the ALR over.
Correct. No other agency approvals required, the council's sole discretion.
Right, thank you very much.
Councillor Matz?
Thank you, Your Worship. To Mr. Garish once again, under the bylaw that's proposed, number 2.3, adding the definition cannabis production. I noticed the last, it says, but excludes the growing of cannabis by an individual for their personal use and consumption.
Mm-hmm.
That is allowed under federal law in residential. And in the M1, we do have caretaker suites which are residential. Would this be then not permitting them? Would this be contrary to the federal law?
No, I don't believe so. I think that what this is basically saying is that we recognize there is a federal allowance for personal consumption within your dwelling unit, and this isn't intended to regulate that in any way.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure that we weren't trying to say that those in the M1 or M2.
get this micro cultivation license, is that something that we're looking at allowing in a different zone, or that only be in the same M1 zone as well, or is that just put in there just to ensure that this isn't gonna be happening as a home business? Cause there is that personal allowance to grow, I think, 4 plants, as Councillor Mattis was referring to.
Mhm.
I read 4 today. Good. Old news.
Yeah, so the personal allowance would be different than microcultivation. Microcultivation allows for small scale businesses, and my understanding it was basically created by the feds, because a lot of what we were seeing were very large scale operations, and not that it was an unfair market, but there was really very limited opportunities for the small scale producers to get a foothold, and so that's where the micro license option came in. But the way the amendment bylaw is drafted, the micro license it's not really a type of production, it's just a license offered by Health Canada, so it would be considered cannabis production, and so therefore only allowed in either the M1 zones, or if you happen to be in an ag zone in the ALR and you comply with the ALC's requirements for cannabis production, then you could do a micro license there.
Okay, thank you.
And for clarification, sorry, the micro cultivation has to be on a certain size property, does it not?
Well, this is the discussion we're having at the regional district, and in that context, we're looking at parcels greater than, I believe it's 2 hectares in area, but of course within the town, you don't really have too many parcels greater than 2 hectares in area that aren't already in the land reserve. So there's not really that opportunity. And then smaller than that, we were concerned about the impacts of microcultivation, primarily in residential amenity, because then you're really looking at trying to fit these things into basically your standard residential neighborhood. And is that appropriate?
Now, the recommendation before council is that the zoning amendment bylaw 1380.04 be read a first and second time and proceed to public hearing, and that the holding of the public hearing be scheduled for April 23rd, 2019, and that staff give notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Move it, Councillor. Councillor Rice, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to item G3, zoning amendment bylaw 1380.05, 558-51 Main Street. Refer to the CEO for comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. This bylaw is before council for first and second reading. I will refer to the contract planner, Mr. Garish, to provide an overview on the application.
Thank you. So with this particular application, the property owner has submitted a rezoning in order to replace the current service commercial 1 zone that applies to the property. The CS1 zone is primarily one that's geared towards vehicles, whether it's servicing, repair, fabricating, etc. And they're looking to have a highway commercial site specific, so it's a C2S zone applied to the property. And that's primarily because the highway commercial zone allows for a greater range of commercial uses, and it's my understanding that they had a previous tenant at the site. That tenant has relocated, and they've had difficulties finding the type of use that's consistent with their current service commercial zone, and they feel that the highway commercial offers more opportunities. From staff's perspective, under the official community plan, the property has been designated for highway commercial uses, so going to a C2 zone is seen to be consistent with the OCP, so we're supportive on that basis.
Questions? Councillor Bentley?
You just noted that they did have a previous tenant in there. Was that non-conforming then? Because there was like a rental center and events center.
Yeah, but well, my understanding is it's the location of the former, well, not the former, I guess Oliver Rental Center is still operating, just not in the town anymore. And so because it's Oliver Rental Center, it's basically vehicle and trailer rentals. That's
There's a party rentals place there too.
Okay.
No, just wondering, because it has been used as commercial then.
Yeah, well, my understanding, and again, I apologize, my experience with Oliver Rental Center is primarily in relation to what's now occurring within electoral area C. And I was under the impression that they were primarily trailers, vehicles, etc. And so if that was the nature of the business, then that's wholly consistent with the town's CS1 zone.
They also offered small engine service, which made them fit under the thing, and then the rest is retail sales associated.
Make everything.
Councillor Schwarzenberg.
I have a couple of questions. Mr. Garish referenced the OCP, and so, because there's such a mix of zoning on that block and a half or 2 blocks, there's single family, there's multifamily, there's commercial, there's tourist places, motels, and that sort of thing. So is the vision of the OCP to turn the whole 2 blocks into highway commercial?
That is a good question. Just bear with me a second here. Okay, so, I mean, to the extent that the official community plan contemplates that, the area between Skagit Avenue and Snoqualmie Avenue, those properties fronting the highway, it looks like the plan is contemplating primarily highway commercial for, I'd say, the northern 2/3, and for the southern third of the street, sorry, the grounds are very close together here. I'd almost say it looks like it's contemplating medium density residential development. So yeah, so for the northern part, primarily highway commercial type uses.
Okay. I'm somewhat opposed to this rezoning because, for the first, one reason is that the property is up for sale, so expanding the zoning is perhaps a reason to try and get more money for the property because it has more uses. My other issue is that there are single family residences on either side of the subject property. And so if you were to ask for something that isn't in the current zoning, you'd have to go to a public hearing, and then the residents on either side would have a say, where if we change the zoning right now, there's lots more options that could go through without having to go to a public hearing. So I'm somewhat opposed to changing the zoning if there's no particular plan coming forward as to what's going to be done on this property.
Councillor Matz.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Councillor Schwarzenberger's point, I would suggest that as long as it remains zoned as it is, as restricted as it is with the service commercial, that it makes it difficult to fill that space with a tenant. I think as a council, we're committed to trying to fill the empty spaces on Main Street. By changing the zoning, it gives them greater flexibility. It matches other zoning in the area directly across the street is similar zoning. And down the block is similar commercial zoning. I think for us to not support a change in zoning here, yes, it may impact the price of the property, but it's really, that part is not my concern. I'm more concerned about filling empty spaces on Main Street. And I think broader zoning would give a greater opportunity for it.
Well, and my point, if I may, Your Worship, I guess my point is that why don't, in that case, why don't we do a blanket rezoning as is, as in the OCP, rather than do a piecemeal, one at a time?
You can't force zoning.
I still hesitate to say this, but I think I agree with everything that Councillor Mattis just said.
Oh my God.
It's a first. No, it's not the first time. It's not the first time.
Are you keeping score?
No.
I do, I agree with everything you said.
Any further questions? We have a recommendation before council that zoning amendment bylaw 13.05 be read a first and second time and proceed to the public hearing. And that the holding of the public hearing be scheduled for April 23rd, 2019, and that staff gives notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Any further discussion?
I'll move the recommendation.
Right. Second, Councillor Price. Any further discussion? Call the question. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to item G4, Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 1370.06 and Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1380.06, 6380 Okanagan Street. Refer to the CAO for some comments.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is with respect to first and second reading for a rezoning and an OCP change. I will pass it over to the contract planner, Mr. Garish, to provide an overview.
Sure, thank you. So with this particular application, the proponent is seeking to change the zoning on the property from the current residential medium density 2, the RM2 zone, to the residential low density duplex RD1 zone. The primary reason for that is the RM2 zone limits the type of permitted dwelling units to either apartment buildings or townhouses, which basically means 3 or more dwelling units under one roof, whereas the applicant has indicated that they have attempted to try to develop this parcel to 3 or more dwelling units, but given topography, site layout, setbacks, etc., has found that particularly challenging. So their request is basically with the RD1 zone to be able to develop a duplex on the property.
Any questions, Council? Councillor Mattis?
Not so much a question, but a comment, Your Worship. The question would be, would any existing variances, because I know there's a variance in place on this property for setbacks on the north side, would that remain in effect with the new zoning?
It would only remain in effect if the applicant came in with a building permit to construct the dwelling or the type of dwelling that the variances were issued for. If they came in with a different dwelling type, they would be expected to comply with the zone setbacks, and if they couldn't meet them, they'd have to go through a separate variance process for this new development.
Okay. My comment would be, and I mentioned it to council privately earlier, I at one time owned this property. It did come with a set of plans for a triplex to fit onto the property. So I know that it will hold that. All that aside, there are other duplexes along that street, so it's very consistent with that. And to be quite honest with you, I'd love to see any building go up on that empty lot, even if it was a single family home at this point. So if it'll help move a project forward, I certainly support it.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I would echo what Councillor Mattis says. I've watched the property go from 1 unit to no units, so to go to 2, I think would be a great improvement. It's worthless.
And I guess then just to clarify the answer that you gave, Mr. Garish, presumably the setback, the variance that is there then was made for these set of plans that existed before. Like, you wouldn't just make a variance to the lot without having a set of plans to go along with it.
Correct.
So it's gonna change regardless.
Yeah, in the absence of plans, there's nothing to assess and no recommendation to make to various setbacks.
So they were made for something and that's gonna change that.
Councillor Schwarzenberg?
Thank you. Is there a different set of setback regulations for the 2 different types of zoning? Is that possibly why there might be a difference as far as how it can be situated on the lot?
Well, the original setback was 3 meters, I believe, on the north side of the property, and at the time, it was the original owners of Eland that applied for a variance and brought that down to 5 feet. Now, it is a park on the north side, so it really not, aesthetically didn't have a whole lot of impact.
I have had discussions, I'm not sure which property over the years, but I know some of the concerns that they've expressed to me in trying to develop the site has been the access and parking and making the garages fit as well as the amenity spaces, which I think we've seen on some other multifamily developments recently. In relation to setbacks, and just doing a quick look here, and I'll just quote for principal buildings and structures. So RD1 is 4.5 meters front, RM2 is 4.5 meters front for the first and second story, and it goes to 6 for every story above that. Rear parcel line in the RD1 zone is 6 meters. In RM2, it's also 6 meters. Interior parcel line in the RD1 zone is 1.5 meters. That increases to 2.4 meters in the RM2 zone, and then to 6 meters for third story and above. And exterior parcel line is 3.5 meters in the RD1 zone, whereas it's 4 meters in the RM2 zone. So there's slight variations, but
Okay.
nothing I would consider significant.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions, council? The recommendation for council is that the official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw 1370.06 and Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1380.06 be read for a first and second time and proceed to public hearing. And then council considers the process as outlined under the public process section of this report to be appropriate consultation for the purpose of section 475 of the Local Government Act. And that in accordance with section 477 of the Local Government Act, council has considered amendment bylaw 1370.06 in conjunction with its financial and applicable waste management plans, and that holding a public hearing will be scheduled for April 23rd, 2019, and then staff give notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Do I have a mover?
I will move that long motion.
That's a windy one.
That was a windy one.
Councilor Schwarzenberger, Councilor Grice, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to business, review of visitors and persons with disabilities vehicle parking regulations, zoning bylaw 1380, referred to the CAO. Time to leave.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is before council with respect to the review of the visitor parking and also with regards to addressing some correspondence received from the provincial government. I will pass this over to Mr. Garish, our contract planner, to provide an overview of this report.
Thank you. I've prepared a couple of slides to try to assist my presentation. So there's really, well, as the CEO's noted, there's two issues, and I'm going to cover the visitor parking regulations first. So as council may or may not be aware, we do have a fairly extensive list of parking regulations within the zoning bylaw, section 8.0. And within those, right near the very front of the section 8.2, we have the two tables that we generally rely on to give us the required ratios for types of uses and how many parking spaces have to be provided on-site or off-street, whichever your preference is. And the snippet here at the left of the slide just shows that standard table. So we have general uses, and the example here is residential, and then the second table that we rely on is for loading spaces. We do have text later on in the bylaw that deals with visitor parking requirements, and that's existed within the various zoning bylaws that the town has had for the last 25 odd years. And basically what it says is that off-street automobile parking areas for multifamily residential buildings shall provide a minimum of 20% of required parking spaces for visitor use. Now, despite being in the bylaw for the better part of a quarter century, it seems to have caused, this particular wording seems to become an issue within the last 12 months in relation to at least 3, possibly 4 different multifamily residential developments. And there seems to be some confusion around the wording and whether it's actually requiring 20% of the total required be assigned to visitor parking, or as we interpret the regulation, that in addition to what's required for each of the residential units based on bedroom count, that there has to be an additional 20% visitor parking provided on top of that. So for example, if you have to have 100 parking spaces, it's not a matter of 20 of those 100 being for visitor parking, it's that you have to actually provide 120 spaces in total. Yeah, and sorry, I should have jumped to this slide. So yeah, this was, you'll recognize one of these. The other two are in the queue, and we're working through the same issue that the designs were completed without the proponent adequately taking into consideration the visitor parking space requirements. So, and I think, I don't know, I mean, I don't have any proof as to what's going on, but I think anecdotally what's happened is with the new bylaw. Well, the previous bylaw had this, the table for parking requirements at the end of section 8, but of course that's the section that we use the most often, so with the current bylaw we moved it right up to the front of section 0.8, and I think what may be happening is that people aren't reading all of the regulations that follow on from these tables. So to address this, what we'd like to do, to try to provide clarity and hopefully avoid some of the scenarios we've had recently, is to move the visitor parking spaces out of the textual section of Section 8 and to recreate it as a table similar to the ones that we use for other types of uses. And then also just to clarify the wording, structure it the same so that for each unit that's being provided, that there's a 0.2, i.e. 20% requirement for visitor parking spaces. So we're hopeful, knock on wood, that this will catch people's attention and won't be lost in the other text, and that when they're doing their designs, we won't have situations where there's significant shortfalls of visitor parking spaces. The second item in your report, again, as the CEO indicated, was a letter that came through at the end of February from two MLAs in Victoria. And we did receive a copy at the regional district, and I believe some of our other member municipalities did as well, based on questions that we got. And it was basically alerting us to some changes that were made to the BC Building Code late December 2018. And those changes, I think, removed pretty sure it was all of the requirements in the code that related to the provision of, what our bylaw calls parking spaces for persons with disabilities. And the point of the letter was just to alert local governments to these changes, and also to encourage local governments to build some of those requirements into the zoning bylaws so that they weren't lost entirely when new development was being processed and permitted. So what I gleaned from the building code prior to its change in December 2018 was that it generally spoke to minimum dimensions for disabled parking spaces, the type of surfacing that should be used, the location of the spots in relation to the, principal structure on the parcel, and again also to clearly identify that those parking spaces are for disabled drivers. This particular slide is a cut and paste from what's already in the bylaw, and I believe for the most part it already covers off what was previously in the building code. We have regulations that speak to using appropriate signage. We have kind of a reference to, it's almost the opposite of the issue with the visitor parking. It actually, I think this one is saying the calculation of minimum parking spaces for persons with disabilities is part of the total. It's not in addition to the total. But at least it's clarifying that. And then the third point is the minimum dimensions for the parking spaces. So I think we're pretty much good in that respect. But the one thing that we are missing that the building code used to have is the ratio that parking spaces should be provided based on the density of development being proposed. So as I understand it, what the building code stated was that when you hit 50 parking stalls, that's when the requirement for a disabled parking space kicked in, and then additional spaces were to be provided for each 100 spaces thereafter, or ratio, etc. Whereas the zoning bylaw doesn't have any of that in it at the moment. And so the amendment bylaw is proposing that council address this if it's so inclined. And taking a lesson from what's happened with visitor parking spaces, not doing it textually like was in the building code, but using one of these tables that we have for the other types of uses. And basically trying to recreate, for the most part, what the building code previously required, although as you probably saw in the report, this particular bylaw kicks in this particular table would kick in at a slightly lower level of parking spaces. The number that's shown here is 25, whereas I think the building code was 50. And to be honest, the reason for that, I just did a quick scan of other local government bylaws, and that generally seemed to be the number that most applied. So for discussion purposes, I put it in the bylaw, but I will take direction from council if another number is preferred. And that's it for the presentation. I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions, council? Councillor Schwarzenberg?
Thank you, Worship. Through to the contract planner. I'm just a little confused about this, and perhaps the recent variances that we imposed on the spillway project.
Mm-hmm.
They have 28 units, so 20% is 5.6 or 6, plus one disabled is 7 visitor parking spots.
Mm-hmm.
They came to us with 8, and we bumped them up to 10. Was that because they had variances in their number of units that they had based on bedrooms and that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, the spillway.
Spillway.
Spillway. I was gonna say wrong electorally with this. Sorry, I had too many hats, but, the Spillway Road one, I mean, that's a difficult one to use as an example because, that permit could have been structured any number of different ways. I mean, what they came in with, they had proposed, as it happened, just by chance, visitor parking spaces anyway, but it didn't meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw because they didn't know what the requirements of the zoning bylaw were. It was news to them that there was a visitor parking provision in there that they had to meet, right? So in going back and forth with them and discussing how best to achieve what the bylaw was trying to do, the numbers that we came up with were basically, I mean, we could have said 10% parking. I think the permit said to reduce it from 20% to 15%, and then to reduce some of the bedroom count requirements as well. But you know that it could have gone in any number of different ways. So I'm not sure if that's the best.
But they were kind of linked together, the variances on the bedroom counts with the visitor parking.
Yeah, and the proponent did try to provide visitor parking, but of their own accord. They weren't aware that we had our own requirements, which was a concern to us, right? Because you know, to us, it's clearly in the bylaw. And then you start getting questions from other proponents about, well, is that in addition to, or is that part of your existing requirement? And to us, it was clear, but when it happens 2, 3, 4 times, you start to wonder if there's a problem here, and if we need to address it. So.
Thanks, Mr. Garish.
Councilman Dean.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One, I think you answered with one of your slides, but I have it highlighted, so I'm gonna mention it anyway. I was really confused when I read the number of required off-street parking spaces for persons with disabilities. So it says where more than 50 stalls are provided, parking stalls for persons with disabilities shall be provided at the ratio of 1 for every 100 or part thereof. So in my mind, that meant up to 100, it's 1 stall, and then every other 100 or part thereof is another stall, but we've started it under 50 is 1 stall, and then adding on. So I was just misreading it. This is the standard way to do it.
Well, I have to admit, I mean, the building code, I found the building code regulation challenging, and I had to check with the building inspector, but, so my understanding is that, as soon as you hit 50, you're at 1. Persons with a disability provided for a ratio of 1 for every 100 or part thereof. So yeah, so the question is, are between 50 and 150, are you still at 1 or are you at 2?
Well, so to me, it means between 50 and 100, you're at 1. And then if you're at 101, you're at 2.
Mm-hmm.
But we're at 2 and 3.
But we started under 50, so I read it different than you, clearly. You read it right.
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know, I'd be interested to know what anybody else thought when they read it, because I highlighted the whole section in yellow because I did not understand how the math didn't work.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I mean, I thought that this table was the proposed change, going from 1 per every 100 and then changing to 2, starting with 1 and 25.
Yeah, well, so the table before you, for discussion purposes, the first requirement for a disabled person parking spot would be 25, whereas under the code it would have been 50. And then we structure it in increments of 50 and then into hundreds. So, I mean, it's just, like I said, it's for discussion purposes, we can certainly tweak that table, but to get it to you and to have something to present, this is what I came up with, so.
So I'm sorry, if I follow up. The wording comes directly from the building code and the table you created?
Well, the building code is the inspiration for it. I think that was the purpose of the letter from the MLAs, is that because it's no longer in the code, they would like us to build that ratio into our bylaws. We could recreate it exactly as it was in the code, but like as we've just seen, we're reading those code provisions differently. Whereas I would hope that the table that we proposed here is a little bit clearer, but we can certainly tweak the numbers if council wants to have a different approach.
For sure, I agree, a table's the way to go, because you can clearly read things way different ways.
Councillor Schwarzenberg.
Councilor Mass, you want to go ahead?
I was gonna say, based on what I've just heard and reading it and trying to understand it, it would almost make more sense that it says that the table 8, or suggested table 8.2.4, rather than having a 0 in there, should have a 1. If you've got 24 units, you should be providing one handicap space, you shouldn't be providing 0.
So,
Councillor Benjamin?
so, thank you. So is that what you're suggesting originally, not even have the 24 in there, just from 1 to 49 units, you're at 1?
Well, council may want to consider if it wants to impose a kind of a, I don't want to say burden, but a requirement on somebody, although, again, ironically, you're not gonna have a multifamily unit with only one parking space requirement. I think at a minimum, it's gonna be at least 3. But if it's only 3 one-bedroom units, that would be 3, that'd actually be 6, 4, 6. Anyway, would a better number be 15 or 12? Like, if somebody's building to the minimum 3 units, do they have to provide a handicap parking space? Or should the number be a bit higher?
Councillor Schwartzberger?
I think the table 8.2.4 is great the way it is, because obviously if you have 25 off-street parking, visitor parking spots, at least one of them should be a disability, and then as you go up, I think that's fine the way it is there. The only question is the minimum, where you start at. And perhaps as Councillor Mattis said, you start at 15 or
Well,
something like that.
I guess what I'm referring to is if we have 0.2 per dwelling unit, so if you've got 3 units, you've only got to provide 1 parking stall, 1 visitor parking stall for 3 units, because you'd be at 0.6 basically. No, that shouldn't be necessarily designated as a handicap, but where does that, and should we be saying that when you reach whatever the threshold is, when you're at the minimum threshold, it's not an additional parking stall, but rather it could be one of the visitor stalls.
Right. And that is the idea, right, of if you have 25 visitor stalls, one of them will be a disability stall.
Yeah, well, actually, the current wording in the bylaw at the moment clarifies that, I'll use my example of 100 spots. If you have to have 100 spots, say for argument's sake, you have to have 2 handicap. It's not 102, it's 2 of your 100 have to be for disabled persons.
And that's very clear in the bylaw?
Yeah.
Well, I believe so, yes.
Councillor Benjamin?
Thank you. So the other thing in the letter from MLA Cadeau and Stillwell is that they suggest that the bylaw, they strongly recommend the adoption of the bylaw that references the CSA standard. So is that what's being done here?
No, I didn't do that because I felt that the zoning bylaw already has, for the most part, the minimum dimension signage requirements for the visitor parking, the person with disability parking spaces. So rather, and then also, in terms of usability, I always worry about, like, it's easy for me to get my hands on those CSA standards because it's what I do every day. But if somebody in the community is reading our bylaw and wants to find out what this CSA standard is, how easy would it be for them to get their hands on it and then interpret it?
As opposed to our standard.
Right.
Councillor Schwartzberger?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just thinking here, I mean, if you have a 50 unit complex, 20% of that only requires 10 off-site parking stalls. So that's a pretty minimal amount. I mean, to get 25, you have to have 125 units to require 25 parking stalls, which is a lot more than we see ever here. So I would think that the number for the first disability stall should be quite a bit less than 25.
I'm not sure, I support, I'm not sure what the number is.
I don't know what the number is either,
I can come back with something
Okay,
lower.
on.
No, I would agree as well. I think 24 is too high. 24 spaces and not handicap accessible spaces in 24. So I'm almost thinking you're gonna have two, one should be handicap accessible.
Or at least once you get to 5 or 6, maybe, you know, at a minimum.
Well, especially if it's, we're not asking for an additional stall, it just means that one of the stalls that's being provided needs to be functional.
Designated.
Yes. However, they have to be bigger stalls.
For sure, it's gonna be
So
functional,
that
yeah.
they actually take up the space of roughly 2 stalls, but.
Councilor Madison.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think based on our discussion that the contract planner is understanding the direction that council's pointing to, so on that basis, I would move that council direct staff to initiate an amendment to bylaw, to the current bylaw. So it'll be coming back at an amendment. Long ways to go.
Mhm. Have you moved it?
I move.
I'll second.
Councilor Grace. Any further discussion? So, we will get something back, that table that's modified, basically, on that particular issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other section seemed reasonable, that we would clarify our wording so that we stop having issues.
Yeah, it's great that you noticed this. I see how it would have been a problem.
See, further discussion, I'll call a question, those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Moving to correspondence, I'll refer to the CAO.
Thank you, Worship. There is no correspondence within this report, so you have a recommendation to receive the weekly mail distributed for the weeks of March 25th to the 29th and April 1st to the 5th.
Councilor Price. Good. Schwarzenberger, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question, those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Reports. Waller Fire Department, report for the month of March 2019. Receipt, seconded Councilor Price. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question, those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Moving to item 2, building report for the month of 2019, March 2019.
I'll move receipt.
Proceed. Second, Councilor Rice. Any further discussion? Councilor Ventimiglia?
Is the office rental that's there, is that the hospital?
Yes, it is.
So that's exciting, that they've taken a permit, but I guess I just noticed the project value was less than $700,000, and it was $1 million project, and then we were told that it was over budget, and I think the foundation was providing some extra funding, so that's interesting.
We can only go on the value that they provide us.
Okay, well, maybe we should check into that.
Wholesale
We'll
versus
go sleuthing.
Yeah, it has been tendered and awarded, so they have a
And-
number.
And, yeah, I'm certain we were told that it was over budget, and the foundation was providing some additional funding to help offset.
Foundation may want to withdraw that.
Yeah.
CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to point out that we have started to provide you with a different report, and it also is now providing you with the permit bill amount, as opposed to just seeing the project value. It's showing how much we're collecting in fees.
Any further discussion? Call the question, those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And the last report is the airport manager report for the month of March 2019.
Move receipt.
Receipt, Councilor Rice, second. Councilor Madison, any further discussion? Call the question, those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And report from Councilor Ventimiglia.
Start with me. So I missed last meeting, I'm gonna report on a couple of things before then. On Wednesday, March the 13th, the premier was in the valley. Everyone saw that, so he was at Structural in Menoke Falls, making an announcement on 6, and since then I've spoken to our MP, and he just wants to reassure us that he's working on his end to try and help us get a meeting this spring with the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Minister Machial, regarding our canal funding, so hopefully we can arrange something while we're at CM. Tuesday, March the 19th, the mayor and I have been spending lots of time together. We were together again with Larry Olson. And Larry Olson has a great job title. He is the South Okanagan Kootenai Boundaries Milkmeen Region Regional Economic Operations Branch Rural Development Lands and Innovation Division, Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. That's quite a guy. Yeah.
He's got a big business.
Oh, yes, he has quite a title. So we met with him. He just wanted to talk a bit about economic development opportunities, community development. He shared with us some information about the provincial nominee program, the Entrepreneurial Immigration Regional Pilot Program, where municipalities can apply for provincial nominees. And we'd like to invite him at some point in the near future to talk to all of us about community development in general and hopefully identify some opportunities to work with them. Thursday, March the 21st, I had regional district and hospital district meetings, and we had a Rise and Report earlier where we talked about the housing that we're working on for locums, and that was a conversation at the regional district as well, the hospital district actually, and we're looking to have sort of a more regional conversation because we're not the only community struggling with recruiting and retaining. March the 22nd, which was the Friday, I toured the potential lodging for the locums, and so it is pretty exciting. We've been asking for a while what we can do to help as a community with the issues that we're facing. This is something that we can actually do and doesn't seem that difficult to do, so it's exciting that we're going to get things going pretty quickly. Thursday, April the 4th, I was at the regional district. Friday, April the 5th, was with a couple of my fellow councillors up at the David E. Campy Tower tour at Penticton Regional Hospital. It's getting ready to open in a couple of weeks, and it's fabulous. And Saturday, April the 6th, just this past Saturday, it was the Burrowing Owl, the First Things First Okanagan, held an Everything Solar Day up there. And there was some pretty neat stuff. And that's the end of my report.
Thanks, Councillor Davila. Councillor Schwarzenberg.
Thank you, Worship. Tuesday, April 2nd, I did a radio interview with CDC Radio on the new overnight staffing at the ER department at SOGH. And later that day, I attended the Spirit of Oliver reception. Wednesday, April 3rd, I attended the Oliver Tourism AGM with Councillor Mattis. Friday, April 5th, I attended the 10th annual Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, and I also toured the new David Campy Tower at the Penticton Regional Hospital. And Saturday, I also attended the First Okanagan First Renewable Energy Fair at Burrowing Owl Winery, and there were some really interesting things there, a lot of electric vehicles on display and solar panels and all the latest gadgets for renewable energy, so that was very interesting. That's my report.
Thanks, Councillor Schwarzenberg. Councillor Grice.
Thank you, Worship. Tuesday, March 26th, I attended the Harvest Hut Public Information Meeting. Friday, April 5th, I also attended the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, and later that morning toured the David E. Campy Tower at Penticton Regional Hospital. I think we were all pretty blown away by the technology. It was very impressive, yeah. And then Saturday, April 6th, also attended the First Things First 3 Ways to Save the Climate event with the Burrowing Owl Winery and Today Meetings. And that's in my report.
Thanks, Councillor Grice. Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. April 2nd was the Airport Advisory Committee meeting, which I attended. And then later that evening, the Spirit of Oliver reception up at Frank Venables. April 3rd was the Oliver Tourism AGM, Councillor Schwarzenberger. April 6th in the morning, I went to the Solar Power Climate Forum out at Burrowing Owl very quickly, and then was able to make it up to the SOSS Richmond Society golf tournament fundraiser. Just a note, they give over $25,000 a year to deserving students in bursaries and scholarships. And earlier this afternoon, I attended the Curling Club 50th Anniversary Committee organizing meeting. This year, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the arena, and next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Curling Club, and they are working on some different things and different ideas, and so we went to that.
Thanks, Councillor Mattis. On March 26th, I attended the Rural Healthcare Community Coalition meeting in Caramias, and later in the evening, the Harvest Hut Public Information meeting. On March 27th, I also toured the Penticton Hospital. Yes, very, very impressive, for sure. I think the way they have it laid out with efficiency there, I think there will be a couple more surgeries a day, just inefficiencies. March 31st, Women of Oliver for Women presentation tea. That was pretty interesting, quite a group of ladies there for sure. April 1st, Oliver Asuya's Primary Care Network meeting in the evening. That was the first one working on the gap analysis for Oliver Asuya's. April 2nd, Spirit of Oliver presentation at the Venables Theatre. And April 4th, Michael Hingston attended that speaking engagement where he spoke at the Venables Theatre about his blindness and 9/11. He was actually in one of the towers at 9/11 when the plane hit it. And the thing that amazed me about that talk, the one thing that sticks with me is when he said they were on the north side of the tower and the plane hit on the south side. And I may have that backwards, but he was on the opposite side, and he said the whole building moved 20 feet. Like just curved as the plane hit it, and then it came back, and then the expansion joint settled back in, so it not only moved, came back and dropped 4 or 5 feet. He said, I can't imagine. Anyway, April 5th, attended the 10th Annual Mayor's Prairie Breakfast. 6th and 7th, the SOS Enrichment Society fundraiser. And this afternoon I was at the volunteer appreciation for SOGH at the community center. I'm exhausted.
That golf will take it
You
out.
have arrived.
The upcoming meetings, Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019, that's Tuesday after Easter Monday. Regular open council meeting, and there's a meeting scheduled April 25th, 2019 at 9 a.m. Special open council meeting. Acting mayor for April and May is Councillor Mattis. And at this time, I would ask if there's anyone in attendance in the public that has a question or a comment they'd like to step up to the podium. No? Then I will ask for a motion. Oops. CEO.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a comment.
Okay.
I went to and toured the Dave Campy Tower on the Thursday night, and walking along Main Street, that's what they call it.
Yeah.
There's a black and white photography through the whole thing, and I happened to be stopped in one area, and I looked over, and lo and behold, there was a picture from 1920 to 27 of the big ditch water irrigation flume south of Oliver. So it's a beautiful picture, and I was just like, wow, that's our 100th, this is our 100th year for this, this ditch. It's gonna be 100 years old this year. So it's quite amazing that it's actually in the hallways of the new tower. And all the equipment that's in that tower has been done through donations. They've collected about $19 million so far, but everything you see in there, besides the paint on the walls and the walls themselves, any equipment, anything, was all through the donations from the foundation.
And it's kind of neat the way they've done it, that we just learned on Friday. Each room, it has the name of the family or the people,
Yeah.
the couple that have donated to fill that room with just supplies. And the artwork, you're right, is fabulous. They have down another quarter, we didn't get to go down because they were just finishing the floors, but all of the original hospitals, I don't know if it was in interior health but in this end of the valley, in the smoke community anyway, so like St. Martin's, for example, all of the original hospitals that were here. We were kind of joking, but like asking them to check in, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
It feels very warm, it's not institutional health
Yeah, you don't have to share a room.
Still don't wanna go there.
Yeah.
You don't have to share a room either.
No, you don't.